Hello friend, my name is Amanda Arneill and it is time for us to create some gorgeous beauty with the new Tombow colored Fudenosuke pens. There is a 10 pack, which means there are 10 colors for us to make beautiful use of by doing some creative combining and adding shadow lines with a pop of color and then a stacked shadow itself. You will be creating pieces that are going to pop off the page. Let's get started. So with this type of lettering, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using 2 colors of Tombow pens to do the body of your lettering. You're going to also use a pop of colors, so a color that's different for an outline shadow, and then you're going to use the gray for a perfect shadow to make that outline pop even more. For your 2 colors for the body, you need to pick 2 colors that are beside each other in the rainbow. So for instance, yellow and orange, or blue and purple, or even purple and pink, or cycle back around, pink and red. Pick your 2 colors that you'd like to use that are beside each other. Let's say we'll do orange and pink to start. And then you want to pick a complementary color, something that's different and will stand apart. So for instance, a blue. That's opposite on the color wheel. You're also going to need your gray pen, and then you can put the others to the side, but it doesn't mean that you won't use them. Try this technique with lots of different combinations of colors because each time it will look different. First, we're going to be using our body colors. You need to figure out which of these colors is lighter or less saturated because you're going to be stacking one on top of the other. I typically will just go up somewhere in a corner of my page or even on a scrap piece of paper, and I will test out the colors. And I think if I was to add the orange to the pink, it doesn't really work because the orange looks lighter than the pink, whereas if I was to add the pink to the orange, the blend seems a little bit more natural. So test it out each way and see which one you prefer. I hadn't mentioned, but I'm using a Rhodia pad for my Tombow pens. I always like to use a really nice smooth paper because it'll keep the nibs of your pens lasting longer than they would if you were using regular printer paper or a harsher sort of cardstock that has any sort of texture at all. Even if it's the smallest amount of texture, it's still going to be really hard on the nib of your pens. So these Rhodia pads are perfect. Now, because I like to test everything out before I do it, especially when I'm using color, let's try the blue and just draw it beside your lettering to see what it'll look like. Now I think that this blue looks really interesting with the orange, and since the orange on the bottom combination is what we're going to be using, I think we'll keep this color. You could also try some of the other colors to see how those would look beside, like the purple is also really nice, and then swap it out. If you don't want the blue, yeah, let's go with the purple. On a new piece of paper, because of course you don't really want to have your little scribbles up in the top corner, we're going to start writing our word. To do this technique, you're only going to be writing part of the word at first. So you're only going to be writing the bottom, which can be a little bit tricky. So I would suggest taking a pencil and quickly sketching out your word. In our case, we're going to be writing laughter. Sketching is also really good because it can give you a sense of where your letters are going to go and also how you can make them play together. Once you have your word written out, one of the tricky things is if you go over this pencil with your ink, you're going to set the pencil into the paper. So now we're going to be erasing it, but you don't want to erase it completely, just enough that you can still sort of see it, but get it light enough that you won't actually see the pencil shining through under the ink. So really you just sort of want that hint of where your letters should be. I like to use a white eraser because it doesn't add any color to the page like sometimes a pink eraser can. So a nice white eraser is probably something you'll want to add to your collection if you don't already have one. And your eraser does not have to be this small. you can get a slightly larger one. Pencil to the side. It's time for you to take your lighter color, your less saturated color, and we're going to put that on the bottom of the letters. Imagine an imaginary line, which makes sense if you're imagining, going right through the middle of your letters, like you're cutting them all in half. Below that, you're going to use your lighter, less saturated color. That means it might be a little bit tricky. You're going to have to pick up your pen a lot, so that's why these pencil hints are super helpful. Now, if I was to go halfway up my L, that would be well above all these middle height letters, the A, the U, the E, and the R. So go slightly less than halfway on those tall letters so that you're cutting right around the middle of your mid-height letters. You still want to really focus on getting your upstrokes and downstrokes where they should be, but you're only doing half of the letter. It's going to look quite weird at first, but I promise in the end it'll look gorgeous. Now we're on to the second color. That is your more saturated color, the one that you're going to put on top. And for this, you're going to have to mix your strokes a little bit because you want to get a slight overlap between the two colors. So for this upstroke, if you have a hard time starting in your same upstroke and going up, you can always take your upstroke down. I won't tell anyone. It's not cheating, it's a strategy. You can take your upstroke down and make sure that you match up perfectly to your letter. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here, I'll do a downstroke down and then match up where I had that first line. And I also like to come back and color in a little bit more so that that area where the two are meeting is extra saturated. And then it kind of blends out to this lighter pink up here. And that blend zone is very, very interesting. Now with your upstroke, typically you would go up, but we have a little bit more control when we're going down. And with these Tombow pens, the nib is actually super crisp. So you can do a downstroke down with just the nib of your pen, making sure that you meet up perfectly. And again, add a little bit more color with tiny feather strokes to that middle area. We're going to continue with all of the letters like that, making sure that you have a slight overlap, getting your nice transitions, and then adding a bit more saturation right to the middle of your letter. Now we have our two colors on the page. They're mixed together in the center area and it has a little bit of a gradient. This is nice, but we're not even close to done. That was step one. Next, step two is to take your pop of color and we are going to draw a shadow line. Not a thick shadow, we're just using the fine tip point of the pen and we're going to draw a line slightly to the right and slightly below the letters we've already created. The letters that I wrote here are actually quite large, and the reason that I did that is because then we will have space for this shadow line and a gray shadow. The two together, it's delicious. Very carefully, with lots of control, you want to draw your line in so that you have a consistent distance between that line and your first lettering line. Imagine that you're actually taking your letters and shifting them down and to the side a little bit, and wherever you're shifting it, that's where you are going to draw your new line in. You might find in between some of your letters, it gets a little bit tight, but it's important to try to maintain that distance of your initial letter, white space, and then your pop of color. Now that we have our line, the next step is to add the shadow. And that line is also sort of a cheat for you because you're going to line up the nib of your pen with that line, and you're going to use pressure to get a nice thick shadow all the way through your piece. Areas where your shadow might get close to the letter, I try to color those in carefully so that you're still getting the shadow, but you're leaving a little bit of white just to give it a touch of a border. There you have it. Step 1 is to pencil in and then use your lighter color for the bottom, your more saturated color for the top, and meet it up. Step 2 is to take your complementary or your pop of color and draw your shadow line. And then step 3 is to take your gray, trace that shadow line with full pressure, and add a nice gray shadow onto your letters. This technique will help your Tombow Fudenosuke pens to pop off the page with color. Now, if you want to go really crazy, you could try 3 colors. So instead of having the line in the center, maybe have a band of color in the center. So for instance, if you were to do pink, purple, and red, the pink is the one that would go in the middle because it's in the middle in a rainbow between purple and red. So purple moves to pink and then pink moves to red. So this is the one that you would put in the center of your 3-color sandwich. I would suggest starting off with the middle color and then building off your other colors, top and bottom, off of that. Tips and tricks. Make sure that you're selecting colors that are beside one another on the rainbow. Also make sure you're going slow enough so that the ink actually dries because you're going back and forth and you don't want any smudges on your finger that will ruin your piece. Go back also and feather in those areas where the 2 colors meet up. For the purple, it was a little bit harder because it couldn't mesh very nicely with the pink, so you can always go in and just do really tiny feather strokes to soften that area of transition. And the final tip is to write your letters a little bit bigger than you usually would. That will give you the space that you need to be able to put your shadow line and your gray shadow all inside your piece there. Those tips, these pens, and you will be creating absolutely beautiful pieces. Don't forget to share your work with the hashtag #AmandaArneillBlog so that I can see the beautiful things that you create after watching this quick tutorial.